James, just before we put
Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to first formal meeting of the new year. So welcome to Strategy and Policy Committee meeting, SPC 25/1. Welcome everyone here. Start with the usual karakia. Whakatau mai te wairua, whakawātea mai te hinanaro, whakarite mai te tinana, ki ea ai ngā mahi. Ai. So we've just about got everyone here now, so thank you. Are there any, there's no consideration of late items. Does anyone have a declaration of interest? No? Okay. There are no public excluded items and we don't have a public forum today. So with that, we'll move on to the, and there's no presentation, so we'll move on to item 10, the reports and the adoption of the Tahawai Reserve Concept Plan. And Jason, please.
Morena. Yes, so very self-explanatory this morning. I take this report as read. It is, indeed asking the committee to consider consultation feedback received late last year and consider the adoption of the Tahawai Reserve Concept Plan. This concept plan, the development of this plan has been in the works for several years now. It's been nearly 12 months ago, I think, on the 20th of February was one of the first workshops that we held with Ngāti Tawai, Ngāi Tamawhārewa, the Johnston family, some of the local residents, the neighbouring property owners, Tanners Point residents, and Ratepayers Association, and the Katikati Community Board Chair, where we went around the room and heard all sorts of aspirations, and I learned an awful lot about the community, which was a very, very cool moment for myself and my team, and just hearing those stories and all the aspirations that they wanted for this reserve. So all of that bound together into that initial draft presented to the public, and later from July to August last year, and minor amendments were made based on the feedback. The majority of the features that were created were well supported. As you can see in this report, there is a staged plan for implementation over a series of 7 years, and using future council decision-making processes, so annual plan, long-term plan, to confirm what funding and what sort of timeframes to use. It is an itemised list. In my opinion, any of those features can be advanced if we need to, if we can. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Jason. So I'm happy to go to questions. I've got Anne first, and sorry, Councillor Henry, and then Councillor Cox.
A very successful and long consultation process. And given that there were two communities of interest that had equally as much passion about that area as each other, and there were some tensions there at times which were managed extremely well, so congratulations to you. But I say team, but you seem to be a loner. You're a team of one.
You're online.
Anyway, my question is, and it'll be a community question about the building, the house, the section that has been property that was bought and divided off to enable the cultural aspect to be protected. Do we have any? There's tenants in there now. Are they still there? Or
I'm conscious this is about the concept plan, not about other issues along those lines. I mean, if there's one answer you want to give, please do. But if you don't feel you have to on this one, because it is a separate issue.
I don't have information on that, unfortunately. Peter May online.
Yeah, well, I'd like to know if you can pass that on to Peter, please. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Cox.
Well, Councillor Henry actually alluded to what I was going to ask too, just from regarding, there was some other input from tangata whenua from a different area who felt that they hadn't been adequately involved in the process, and sounds like you've dealt with that very well. So that was really all I wanted to talk about.
Thank you. Councillor Song.
Thank you, sir. Basically, probably following the same line as just before. I noticed, have seen in those submissions that there were a couple of very strong ones about, hey, which people really belonged here? And do you feel comfy? My question is, do you feel comfy that we've been able to secure that situation, or is it something that, well, it needs to proceed anyway, and where it goes from there is where it goes?
Yeah, I'm very comfortable with the current progress. Kaupapa Māori team doing a fantastic job behind the scenes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Councillor Wickers.
It looks good. Just a question around the funding side of it. So on page 15, it says that the gardens of the Rongoa will be funded by community. And then on later on, it shows 34K in the actual costings for those things. Just that could be clarified.
Yep. So that will be the initial, so creating the actual garden, so all the structures that the plants will sit in, whereas the plants themselves, that'll be provided by the community.
Okay, Councillor Maybench.
I sort of a question, but I think how far we've come, and I think we should be congratulating Peter Watson, because, Mr. Chairman, he was the one who got the squatters off this land. The house is to fund the development of the reserve. Has that gone on the market yet?
That's the question that Councillor Henry asked, but that's not within this concept plan, so I don't think we should be discussing that at this point.
Well, sir,
We'll get an update at a suitable point.
Yeah, well, sir, I think the progress to date has been remarkable. And I'm sure somebody from Katikati wants to move the recommendation. If they don't, I do.
We'll come to that. Thank you, Councillor Maybench. Councillor Joyce.
There's been a lot of focus on the iwi and hapu issues, and that's correct. We also have another neighbour. Have we been able to keep him happy as well? The guy that was worried about people staring in his kitchen windows as they were walking past, has that been suitably resolved to all satisfaction?
Yeah, from what I've heard, yes, that's okay at this stage. One of the operations, person in charge of operations up in Katikati, she's got a good relationship with him. So I'm hopefully I'll receive more feedback, and I'm going to assume that any silence is good, it's positive.
Jason, question from me. The fence for the escarpment, is that at the top or at the bottom?
That is down at the bottom. So that is for people that are going to use that natural walking track, just to add an extra layer of protection.
Okay, I think we've come to the end of the question. So I'll look for a mover and seconder for the recommendations, which we'll get to it. Recommendations 1 to 5. Do I have a mover and seconder, please? Okay, Councillor Joyce and Councillor Henry. Is there any debate on this one? Councillor Joyce, would you like to?
I'd just like to add my congratulations. I mean, this piece of land has a long history. It was interesting when I was at the Waihi Beach Centenary, school centenary, that some of the hapu there was saying their parents went to the native school on this site. You know, it's long been a site that's tied to the local community, and particularly, as you can see from the plan, of importance to hapu and iwi. It's also important to the local community at Tanner's Point, and I think it's all come together rather well, to be honest. It will take time to develop. People seem to forget, but the actual deal we put through was that we'd buy the property, sell the house, and use the sale of the house to offset the cost of the purchase. So that is still, as I understand it, council policy. And what it means is that we're basically, the bit that has commercial value will be sold off, and the bit that has cultural value, in particular the past site and the burial sites, will remain in public protection. So it's quite a cost-effective plan, which is kind of nice. So I think, it is a really good result. We're not trying to load it with heaps of features, which I think is important. When you go there, the fact that it's nice and peaceful is a big part of the value of the site. So I think it's a good result. That'll take a little while to develop over time, but it's being done in a cost-effective and sensitive way to local needs, and I think it's really cool.
Thank you. Other speakers, Councillor Henry.
Yes, I'd like to reinforce what Councillor Joyce has said, that's why I asked the question about the house, because the proceeds of the sale of the house were to support the development, and there's the cultural significance, and that's what I think we've done very successfully, and we need to stick to what we said we were going to do.
Thank you, Councillor Henry. Councillor Sol.
Thank you, sir. I totally support this going through. I think it's wonderful that we've been able to secure some property for a community in that area that has historic value and potential and cultural value, and can create or provide in the future within perhaps the reserves management plans, if they wish, greater development going forward. But the principal piece of land has been secured, and there is a plan for it to proceed over a period to protect some of these very historic and cultural pieces of history. So it's a wonderful chance for the community and for us to adopt it.
Thank you, Councillor Sol. Councillor Novanj.
Thank you, sir. One of the things I want to say is that Sean Kingi Kaumatua and Helen Willis, formerly part of the Residents Committee Ratepayers Association out at Tanners Point, have had a very fine and caring relationship. And it's one of the very best examples that you can find anywhere of a community working with the local iwi to make sure that something good happens for the community. And the only thing is that the building on the reserve is not funded. And I think it behoves all of us to make sure that we find our networks and we can look for funding to actually get that building up. I don't think it can fund from ratepayers. And I think we can, in fact, use our skills and help our staff to make sure that that building goes up. It might not be this year, but within the next couple of years would be really good. Thank you. So I'm very supportive of the recommendation, sir. I think this is long in the planning, and considering the horror that we had to endure in days gone by, this is really good news.
Thank you, Councillor Novanj. Without wanting to prolong it too long, I support this strongly as well. And having been present probably from early stages and the relationship, signing the relationship agreement with Ngāti Tuai, it's great that we've had that discussion with all the stakeholders, the residents, mana whenua, and it'll be a neat facility for the community on Tanners Point and the wider area. So I strongly support it. And with that, I'm going to put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Moving on now to page 86, which is the review of Class 4 gambling venue policy and TAB venues policy. And for this, we have Dana.
Morena tātou. As the Mayor has indicated, thank you. In front of you is the paper for the review of the Class 4 gambling venue policy and the TAB venues policy. The proposal is that the policies are retained as is. I will take the paper as read, and I'm happy to answer any questions. And I have Dougal here to answer any operational questions.
I have Councillor Coxhead straight in there.
So sorry about this, but you may have, we may have asked this in a workshop, but can you just clarify, if a business is purchased by another person that already has gaming machines, for example, is that right transferred to the new owner? And second question, does this apply to casinos? Not that we have any, but does that apply to this bylaw apply to casinos as well?
I can answer the second question. I'll leave Dougal answer the first one. No, it doesn't. So Class 4 gambling venues are exclusive to electronic gaming machines or pokies.
Hi, Councillor. The first question, yes, if you wanted to buy a tavern and it had a number of gambling machines in there, yes, they would remain, sadly.
Councillor Solomon.
So basically, I will support this, but I have a number of questions. I remember when this was brought in and so on, and the world was a little different then to now. I believe that we've got bigger fish to fry, frankly, in this short period before the end of the term of this council. So I'm able to support it, but there are questions in here. And one is the change that's moving nowadays about gambling and facilities that are there. There's potentially a new law coming in about TABs and stopping online betting. Online betting or gambling has grown. So to me, when we go further, perhaps, and maybe this will be reviewed in the future, that it needs to be looked at on that basis. I had the pleasure to open a conference at the RSA late last year, and the RSA at Waihi Beach put over $150,000 into the Waihi Beach community, and a large sum of that came from their machines. I look at various other things there, so that's sort of even in a debate. So, but I do feel there are a couple of issues. One will be the percentage that's going back into the community is quite noticeably short of what's required. And I think that is one of the things, and we show a graph there of it somewhere, that must be page 94, I think. Basically, how do we control this? How do we monitor it? And then how do we enforce it? Because if they're raising X amount of dollars and only putting in quite substantially less back into, it's not required into a community, it's very clear here, it can be anywhere, but the money being returned is less than what is required. So there are quite a few things I believe that this bylaw needs to be looked at again, but to be frank, I have others there as well. I think it needs to go through as now, and let's get on to the big fish that we've really got, the big work that we've got ahead of us. I just feel that there's quite a few holes in it now as to where we're heading going forward.
Okay, I'm going to respond to the first part, in that I know that online gambling is, a developing scene and it's changed the landscape quite a lot. I know government are looking at that. That's not a gambling venues issue. That's a legal matter, for central government to consider. So I don't think that's relevant to this policy. But the shortage of money, I'll invite our team up there to respond if they can answer anything about the discrepancy in the amount of money being returned to the community. I don't know if it's just a question of it's not coming out to our community or going elsewhere, but perhaps you can comment.
Councillor, I appreciate your concerns and I sympathise with them. We have very little powers in regard to the issues you mentioned. However, what we can do is report matters to the DIA, Department of Internal Affairs, who basically monitor the overall, the umbrella organisation that monitors the overall gambling concerns. And that's the right course of action and the right avenue to go down if you have issues in that regard.
Thank you for that and so on, but I'm sorry, I do disagree about the fact that online and this bylaw don't have something in common, because they do, because there is money, at least, or potential for money to be returned to your communities or to this country, as opposed to it going offshore. So there is a direct reflection on what happens and how our policy reflects the developing world. That's my point. But again, I only bring it up now because I do support it to go through as it is, but I just feel there are flags here, and I have others that really need to be waved somewhere in the not too distant future with our changing world.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other, Councillor Maybench?
I think, sir, we've developed a very conservative, sensible policy, And we're up against it because you only have to look at TV advertising. And it would be really great if there was not a cent came back to the community, because then we would know that gambling wasn't an issue anymore. And so it's we're on a hiding to nothing. We can make submissions to central government, and I think we should. That's the logical place to go. But I think our policy is conservative and sensible, and I thoroughly endorse it and thank the staff for bringing it forward. And I'm happy to move the recommendation, sir.
Thank you, Councillor Murray-Benge. It's been moved. So this is another question. Do you have a question, Councillor Granger? No. So seconded, Councillor Granger. Is there any further debate on this one? Councillor Granger.
Yeah, like Alan, I was around when this was developed last time round, and we did a really good job of it, I believe. And I think it's shown its value in the intervening time. And I well remember when a licence was applied to have pokies in a mokoroa, and the amount of community that turned out to oppose that. So I think we have, with the thinking-led policy and the way we're structured at the moment, have a good workable policy, and I'm happy to support it being rolled over without any further work on staff for the community's time.
Okay, so with the four recommendations there, they've been moved by Councillor Murray-Benge, seconded by Councillor Granger, and I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Thank you very much. Moving on to page 108, the review of animals excluding dogs bylaw and public places bylaw.
Thank you again. So we'll move from policies into bylaws. We've got 3 papers. We'll go through one at a time. The first one is a review of the animals excluding dogs in public places bylaw. These bylaws were adopted a review after 5 years. I'll take the paper as read, bar for one exception, and there's a typo in clause 15. It should reference clause 16 instead of clause 17, but I'm happy to take any questions. Peter's online to answer any questions regarding public places, and Dougal's kindly here to answer any operational questions on animals.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Coxhead, then Councillor Joyce.
Just a question around the keeping of poultry. Given the price of eggs, I would imagine there might be a bit of an upsurge in this. So in what areas are you not able? So it says about cleanliness, health numbers, distance from dwellings. Where can you and can't you have chickens?
Okay, let's let the staff respond.
You've kind of thrown me on that one. Where can't you have chickens? And you're right regarding the egg crisis. I can see more people having chickens moving forward. By and large, people that have chickens, and you can, to a degree, have them in kind of residential areas, but you've got there's certain rules. You've got to have a rather large property, haven't you, to comply with the ruling. Hen house, so far from the fence, you don't want to annoy your neighbours. I used to have chickens many years ago. They upset my neighbours. I had to get rid of them, and I lived on a lifestyle property. By and large, we respond to complaints about poultry, and if we don't get any complaints and we don't know about it, and people live in harmony, that's kind of okay. I'm kind of comfortable with that. We only deal with the complaints, and we try and create that harmony between the neighbouring properties if there are any concerns, which by and large are really down to hen houses not being cleaned out properly, not necessarily noise. The issues we do tend to deal with, though, are what we call roosters.
Choice of words there.
Yes. Where I'm from, they're called something else. Yes. And the noise that they make first thing in the morning. But we get a handful of complaints a year. We're talking half a dozen. So and most of those complaints are resolved peacefully.
So while we're on this topic, given the price of butter, what about having a cow?
We haven't got to that stage yet. But your property's got to be big enough, hasn't it? To be reasonable. I couldn't imagine somebody having a cow in the back garden in somewhere like the lakes, where you've got a very small, back garden. by and large, the type of properties that have cattle and are more self-sufficient are your lifestyle properties and rural properties. We don't tend to have that problem in residential properties, not very often.
Great. Councillor Joyce.
So down the end of Matahui Road, there's a council enclosure. How often do we use it? And do we still need it? I mean, I don't go inspecting it, but a couple of times I've been down there, it looks like it's been rather abandoned.
We've used it once,
In how many years?
and certainly in the last year.
Okay, once in the last year. So we are using it.
We came across a horse that kept escaping. We put it in the enclosure, and then the horse was taken back to its
Right.
owner.
So if you've got a stock issue over the other side of the district, have you got a similar place over there, or do you bring them all to Matahui?
It's the only one we really got.
So,
But
okay.
we kind of, if we've got to lean on another council such as TCC, sometimes
Oh, yeah.
we share facilities.
Yeah, okay.
Councillor Sol.
Thank you, sir. A couple of areas here that one, I guess, would be facing animals and so on. I notice we've changed the situation with bees just a little, is that now you can't get written permission for more. In other words, we've taken away the provision to allow people to have more within a habitable area as such, which doesn't really concern me entirely, except some people may own a number of blocks in that area. And do they have to then have 2 per place or whatever? In other words, it just seems that you would have more control if you were able to have that control. The other area is, and this is just something, to be honest, quite frivolous, but it's something that's been raised by a member in the community with me, and that's actually to do with blocking of public thoroughfares or places. And it just happens that we, with our curbside collection, in some places, empty the bins and put them in the middle of the footpath, blocking the footpath, where there's actually only one other alternative, and that's to step out onto the road. It's just, sorry, it is sort of frivolous, but it's still something that's there. And I've got to follow this up somewhere for a sensible reply and answer to it. But we cover this in our bylaw saying you can't do this. And here we are actually being part of it. That's all.
Just commenting on your first point regarding the consent in writing, it's a change of definition or just the use of consistent terminology. So consent in writing is still available under the drafting.
A lot further to the bee issue. It's predominantly in residential areas, as you can imagine, keeping bees in the back garden. Your next door neighbours perhaps got an allergic reaction to bees. It's a fair point, hence the restriction on bees. But moving forward with the concern in the world about the environment and, the kind of fear-mongering over the lack of bees that exist, I expect there to be an increase in the number of beehives we see. We deal with about half a dozen issues a year regarding bees, and that's predominantly bee feces. As they fly over your property, it gets on your car, it's like concrete to try and get off. We don't really deal with too many issues. And the last one I remember dealing with is up in Athenry, where there was more than 2 beehives, and there's just a complaint from the neighbour. So the bee issue at the moment is not so much of a concern, but I can see it perhaps growing in the future. With regards to your question over curbside collection, I see no other way around the simple fact that you've got to put your bins out to be collected, and it's only a temporary thing once every 2 weeks. So I don't see it as really much of an issue, but I appreciate where people are coming from. If your pavement's not wide enough to get a wheelchair down there or a pram down there, I absolutely understand that. And I don't have any magic wands to solve that problem right now for you. I'm sorry.
Sir, I think that's really quite the case, but it's a good time to have brought it up.
Thank you, Councillor Sol. Councillor Mowbray.
I've been slightly distracted, sir. I really can't get over Councillor Coxhead milking a cow, hand milking a cow before she comes to council. I look forward to seeing it.
Thank you. Councillor Ray.
Yes, hi. I just wanted to ask a question around cats. Has there been any work done around that? I noted that around New Zealand, quite a few councils have sort of put some heavy bylaws in place, including microchipping and things like that. Like, have we done any work around that?
I think, Councillor Ray, the direction from our workshop was that we would wait for national direction on that. I'm aware that some councils have done some work in that space, but the view is generally that if you have a patchwork of 68 different bylaws to look after cats, it's going to be a real mess, and that national direction would be the preferable way forward. But it's not a closed route, but I don't think it's something that our council has indicated it wanted to go down.
Okay, so we're just waiting for national direction.
That would be the cleaner way to do it. Yeah. Are there any other questions? Oh, sorry, Councillor Lucas.
Now, I just got a question on behalf of a friend. So we deal with dangerous dogs through this legislation. Does it deal with dangerous cows?
If we ever came across a situation where there was a roaming leopard in the district, I can assure you I'd be contacting other agencies to deal with that, such as the local zoo or the SPCA.
Councillor Daly.
Dougal, I was just wondering why you've removed the definition for offensive matter or liquid, because in a workshop we had last week, we were talking about stock crossings and potential fines in our charging regime for stock that put offensive matter onto the roads at illegal road crossings or stock crossings. So is that something that's not really covered under the bylaw?
So offensive matter isn't referred to in this these particular bylaws, which relate to animals excluding dogs. The livestock movements bylaw, which we're going to get to next, or sorry, in 2 papers' time, does address that and does include sufficient definition. So it would be addressed under that bylaw.
Well, I've got the microphone. I'm just wondering, and sorry, I haven't prepared thoroughly, but in terms of cows getting loose onto the road and the fence, I guess that's covered by the fencing bylaw, but is there any consideration that should be covered off somewhere else as well, like in here? Bring stock or getting onto the road?
That would be covered under our livestock bylaw, which is, it still comes under my banner. We've got the dogs and we've got livestock as well. Again, it's one of those issues which happens very, very rarely. If there is, and by and large, if cattle or horses do get onto the road, it is due to a broken fence. We deal with it appropriately with the owner at the time. A lot of these things do tend to happen in the evening. So after services, contractors, help us out in that regard. And the next day we deal with the owner appropriately, and in a nice way. I say appropriately, but it's sometimes these things happen. It's not necessarily anybody's fault.
I've got some personal experience with cows in the middle of the night and motor vehicles.
Okay, Dougal, I've got a couple of corrections or queries for you. So page 120, license is misspelled in the definition. I hope we can correct that one. Then moving on to page 142, there was a query around the, I think it was raised in the workshop, in fact, about burning. We've changed it to any matter, including waste or offensive matter in a public place. And the query was raised that we didn't want to preclude, for example, a Matariki fire in a public place, or maybe it needs permission or something along those lines. But it seems to have been, the definition seems to be extended. So there's not just waste or offensive matter that's precluded, but also any matter. And I'm just wondering how people are meant to get around that or seek an exemption. Is that covered in the dispensation section? I just wanted a bit more clarity possibly around, if one read the bylaw, it's quite hard to find how you could do it.
So the intention, and Peter's online, so he may comment further on this. But yeah, under the dispensation, as a general rule, nothing should be burnt, but you can seek dispensation for that under specific circumstances, and they'll be considered by the council or staff on a case-by-case basis as to the appropriate course of action required and what conditions will be put in place to enable that.
So I'm just wondering, would it be worth in that section, in section 4, saying, unless approval is sought from council?
I think there's some acknowledgement there, yes.
Yeah, we can make that amendment.
And the other one is on the same page under the fences. So we've it talks about no person may repair or renew or erect any barbed wire, razor wire, electric wire fence along within 1 meter, etc. And this is unless the barbed wire. So you've gone from the include various types of inappropriate fencing and then suddenly just refer just to the barbed wire. I think we can probably replace that with unless it is placed at a height, and that covers all those items.
Acknowledged. Thank you.
Okay. But that was me. I didn't have any further points. Sorry, Rachel.
Mayor James, can I just perhaps respond to the point or the question that Councillor Daly raised around stock, broadly stock wandering, and where in our regime of bylaws that's covered. It's not expressly covered in our bylaws because there is legislation. So the Impounding Act 1955 is what gives us the guidance around what to do in the case that we find wandering stock. If we can't find it, the owner, then there are provisions in there that allow us to dispense of that stock to defray costs.
Thank you, Rachel. So I think we're out of questions now. So does there mover and seconder for those? I see Deputy Mayor Scrimgeon and Councillor Sol. Is there any more debate on this one?
Sorry, I just wanted to say I did note the comment in the paper that said as no additional issues had been identified since the bylaw was put in place, it was appropriate to adopt this without amendment. And so I think that's a very common sense approach. So I'm happy to support it.
Noting the few amendments we have made, but I take your point. Okay. Council, any other comments? No. So with that, the 3 recommendations, I'll put those with the slight tweaks that we agreed during the meeting. Put that. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. So now we move on to page 155, which is the draft cemeteries bylaw for consultation.
Yes, so in front of you, you have the paper regarding the draft cemeteries bylaw. As we discussed, as the paper states, we introduced a new level of service regarding natural burials in 2021. It's currently prohibited or not enabled under the bylaw, so the proposed amendments enable that to occur. We've also proposed a substantive amendment with the introduction of wider plots to enable larger caskets, again, to meet a demand from the communities. I'll otherwise take the paper as read, and Peter is online to support the operational questions.
Thank you, Dana. Councillor Joyce.
A couple of things. One is, do we need to include in here, or can it be handled under fees, the additional costs of some of these options? For example, the primary cost of cemeteries is land. And if we have larger plot sizes, either natural burials or large caskets, do we need in here something to say we can have differential pricing if we so choose? Or does it just come under fees? I'm not quite sure where that sits. The other one is when we discussed this in workshop, I asked if we could look into the idea of memorial walls. I see there's one in Ngatea, has that been looked at, please? Because I think there was an undertaking that would be looked at. People in Mokoroa, don't have a cemetery nearby. 80%, I'm told by a funeral director, 80% of people are now cremated. Having something close to where people live, if we could find the space, and it doesn't take much, would be something that would be of great community benefit. And I thought we were going to have a look at that as part of this bylaw review, and I don't see it reflected in here. If 80% of people are cremated, then perhaps the bylaw needs to cater for those people, as well as some of the edge cases around burial.
I can answer the first question. In terms of the determination of how cemeteries are funded is a decision you make through the revenue financing policy around that activity, and not something that you would use through the cemeteries bylaw. It is about the provision of the services of what you can do, how you fund it, different conversation. Peter will step in and answer the second part of that question.
Yeah, thank you, Dana. Just to also clarify the first part of that question about the plot size, it's important to realise that when you're paying for the exclusive right of burial, you're paying for that. You're not purchasing the land per se. So it's an exclusive right of burial, and we're just accommodating, I guess, a change in our market with some bigger people in our community. So at the moment, we've been putting people of oversized coffins and stuff on the end of rows. So they overhang outside the areas traditionally identified, but in the new plots beams we're creating on the end of those rows, actually making them a little bit wider. And it's only 200 mil wider, I think, for most of those people there as well. So it's exclusive right of burial you purchase, not the land. I guess what I'm trying to say, there's no clear correlation between how much you pay for it and land size type of thing. It's the right that you're buying. So the other question was, we do have memorial walls at both Te Puke Cemetery and Katikati Cemetery, and my understanding is that we're going to be looking at opportunities in Mokoroa through the Kaimai Ward Reserve Management Plan for a site or sites where a memorial type plaque walls could be located, although it wouldn't be official cemetery per se under the Burial and Cremations Act, but it's something that we can certainly look at through that Reserve Management Plan process, Councillor Joyce.
Can I just follow up? So would that memorial wall actually be somewhere someone can inter ashes, or would it just be a plaque?
I think we need to give that further consideration, because once a body has turned from a body into ashes, it's no longer deemed a legal body. So how it's disposed of is not a legal issue per se under the Burial and Cremations Act. So I guess we'd need to look at that and to see what that demand is of people doing. But yeah.
So it doesn't need to be in here, basically. Okay.
Yeah, it's just not precluded. Yeah.
Councillor Mobench.
I know at McLaren Falls, I'm quite sure there are a number of ashes that have been scattered around the trees, even though it's not permitted. And so I've been told, sir. I haven't advised, I must say. But I think I'm delighted this is going out for consultation. I think Rodney's raised the question of a remembrance wall, and if we could achieve something like that in a Mokoroa would be really worthwhile. But I think the consultation should bring that to the fore. So I'm very supportive that this should go out as quickly as possible.
Thank you. I had a couple of questions or suggested changes, Peter, which I'd like to raise with you now. I know in the workshop, Councillor Granger raised the issue of ashes to water. Now, I know that waterways are outside cemeteries, so I don't think this bylaw refers to them, but is there worth asking the questions about some sort of ashes to water within a cemetery facility? Whether that's culturally right for those who like that kind of thing.
That's a good question. Yeah, well, I can't really speak for Tangata Whenua, but I do know in my past dealings that ashes to water for them is very culturally insensitive. I understand also that in some cultures, I think in some of the Indian religious what they do with putting the ashes into rivers and water is something that they do as they deem appropriate. But we are in New Zealand, and this is in New Zealand, a local bylaw, and yeah, so I'd be guided by Tangata Whenua in that space on any thoughts about that. And we don't have any waterways per se in any of our cemeteries anyway, so this would be outside the area.
Yeah, I think the question just needed asking. I think it's going to be a difficult one, whichever way you go on that one. But Rachel, did you want to comment?
I just wanted to add through you, Mr. Chair, that as Peter has rightly outlined, that the tikanga around the disposal of ashes to waterways is one that we would be guided by Tangata Whenua on. It's not part of the scope, it's outside of the scope of this particular bylaw because it's focused purely on cemeteries. In terms of whether or not there was some sort of artificial feature that was added to cemeteries to provide for other cultures disposing of ashes to water, that is a level of service conversation and one that is probably more rightly addressed through a budget process or a level of service long-term plan process. And I think when we go out for consultation, if there is an overwhelming sense from our Sikh community or from anybody else that this is something they would like to see, whether within a bylaw context or outside of it, then we will get a sense of that through the consultation process as to how big the problem is that we need to solve.
Thank you, Rachel. Now, Peter, I did have a couple of other points just on the natural burial side of things, which is one of the main reasons why we're reviewing this bylaw. And I'd like on page 166. At the end of that section on natural burial plot, to have wording along the lines of, in line with the ethos of returning to nature and low environmental impact, there is a presumption of renewable tenure, allowing plots to be reused at some point many years in the future. So the idea that in a natural burial situation that you've not got that plot forever and a day, and that speaks to Councillor Joyce's point about the cost and that actually natural burials take up a larger area, but if they can be reused, then that issue goes away to a large extent. So something we can hear back from the community through consultation, but I'd like to put it out there just to test the views of the community on that, and whether the people who are interested in natural burials, that's something they adhere to strongly, or whether it's something they don't actually want. I mean, first question, Peter, is that legal?
Yes. Look, if we go under if we're dealing with a very old act here, the Burial and Cremations Act, and I think it was 1964, and it wouldn't have accounted for natural burials, but in that act, it says that when you have the exclusive right of burial, the exclusive right lasts for 60 years. But the whole idea with natural burial is that, it gets into some detail stuff here, depending on your soil type, oxygen levels and moisture present, the breakdown of a body decomposing, it can take 8 weeks for your tissues to go, but the issue with the actual bone structure is something that's relative to pH levels and all sorts of acidity in the soil, etc. Keeping in mind that we've come across koiwi that 300 or 400 years old, so bones could in certain soil circumstances last a very long time. But then, as my research on it overseas is that where they do a follow-up burial, say it might be 20 years later, is normally an average time frame, that they will just, any bones they do find, they pick up and take away and grind them down and do something, dispose of them in other ways, like I guess ashes too. Yeah. So there's a lot of I don't think there's anything in the bylaw that precludes that, and I think adding in what you're suggesting there would certainly test the community's feedback on that and see whether that demand and requirement is there.
Yeah, I mean, I said I'd like to put it in there just to test that view. I was thinking more 50 years rather than 20 years or 8 weeks, but
Yeah.
you know, so it's only a longer time. I didn't want to get specific on the years because I'm not an expert on that, frankly.
Yep.
The exclusivity one is interesting because, you know, reading section 10 of the Act as I've done, it seemed, and that's for 6 years, but that is about taking up use of the plot.
Yep.
Rather than continued use. So if you buy a plot and 60 years later you're still alive, you've lost that right. But it's not about 60 years having been buried there. The Act seems to be silent on reuse, and I was interested in your views on that.
I hear what you're saying. Yeah, so when you do purchase a plot, it doesn't mean you're occupying it straight away. But certainly after 60 years, otherwise you can imagine we'd have all these reserve plots and
Land
we'd be
banking.
land banking. Not very profitable land banking, I'm afraid. But yeah, that would be something that, you know, it hasn't been really much of a problem. We had one out at Te Puke in the old cemetery, but this person was claiming something from over 100 years ago, and I said, look, it doesn't matter because the 60 years kicked in anyway. Yeah, it's more the exception than the rule and what we deal with in managing cemeteries.
Yeah. Okay, Rachel.
Yeah, James, I think adding in the additional words that you've proposed, there's no harm to that. I think it makes it clear what the concept long term of a natural burial is. For some, it will clearly influence demand. For some, they will find it repugnant, and for others who are seeking more of an environmental outcome, it will resonate with them. So let's potentially put it in there and see what the feedback suggests.
Yeah. And a related point, section 3.3 on page 168, I feel that should exclude natural burials, because when you do a natural burial, although you purchase a plot, it gets used in a sequential manner because of, you know, planting schemes and renaturing and so on. Whereas in a traditional cemetery, you know, you've got that one, you pick that spot, you like the view or whatever it might be, and the plot waits for you. But in natural burials, that's not how I understand it works. And so we need to be clear in that section 3.3 that you're not buying an exclusive plot in a natural burial site, even though you are buying a plot.
The wording is may, so we can take that as an operational issue in terms of the natural burials. And given we are yet to commence natural burials, there is an element of we need to see how operationally it will work. So that wording does allow us to weasel our way in and out.
Okay, as long as that's covered, I'm more than happy with that. Yeah. Okay, so that's my comments. Councillor Ray.
I just had a couple of questions. I'm just conscious that we have a lot of rules and bylaws, but I guess the question is around encroachments at a cemetery. Have we ever actually penalised anybody for that? Because I know we have a lot of issues with it, but I'm just curious, we have the rule there and people break the rule, but what do they actually receive? Because it doesn't seem like anything, because I also know of 2 others that are quite a significant breach where they've actually buried in the cemetery without permissions. And I just don't know, like, are we following those up? I would assume that we are, but like, is there a fine being issued? Like, how are we managing that?
Right. Sure, Mr. Chairman. So our approach to encroachments is we started out at Te Puke, so it's a lawn cemetery. So basically a lawn cemetery is you got these concrete beams and the headstones can go on the concrete beams but not encroach out into the grass. We got 3 or 4 people did some encroachment. So we worked through a process with them and eventually got Te Puke New Cemetery at Dudley Burker Drive. That's 100% clean of encroachments. We're currently working through a strategy with the Katikati Cemetery, and we've got quite a few out there, and it's, as you can imagine, it's a very sensitive issue to do. So we've had a letter we've sent out to people. We're taking it on in manageable sizes at the moment because we don't want to be overwhelmed with too much grief to deal with and staff to manage. So we're just doing like a row at a time, so to speak, and we're making progress through there. We've had some good response to why we need to do that. So we did a bit of an FYI and questions and frequently asked questions about why we need to do this. Now, one of the primary reasons is that when you have encroachments that go there, and there might be rocks or plantings and stuff like that, when there's a burial that happens next door, there's nowhere for the grieving family of that burial to stand and to observe, and it makes it health and safety wise very difficult for the contractor and the funeral directors and pallbearers to operate and undertake the thing. So in fairness to there, so we're working through that there. We've been engaged in the case out at Katikati with Ngāi Tomi Whareroa on how we approach that. There's varying opinions within there that we're dealing with, and because some of the people are directly the encroachers in some cases, so that's been quite challenging for us to work through, but we are working through it. Now, Makatū, I'm afraid, is a pretty special place. And there are some things out there, as you know, with some of the gang-related encroachments and stuff that occurred. We've approved some headstones out there. Then when we go there, they've done what they said they were going to do, but then they've added to it, and we've had one-on-one discussions sometimes, and as you can imagine, it's pretty tough for us to confront those gang members in that space. And there's a lot of areas there, but with the terracing there, it's in the older part there, we're not having to do as many reburials there, so the issue about getting access isn't as big as it used to be, because it's predominantly occupied, about 90% occupied. The new areas down below, we can adopt, well, now on the other side, Laura, that you know that we're doing, we can adopt a more of a no tolerance in that situation because it's a clean site. And you're right, there have been some situations, and this is a challenge we have where some parts of our community just have a sense of right there, and they've just gone and dug a hole in a place they think's right and buried, and that's created some issues with us as well. Particularly where there's been a reserved plot that's been occupied by someone who shouldn't be occupying it. So yeah, that creates our challenges for us. So yeah, but with Makatū, it's a very old cemetery going back to, to 18 something. And there's a lot of historic stuff there, and the design of it, it's not a real clear, flat berm cemetery or lawn cemetery per se. So it's a bit of a discussion going on out there. And some of the other things we've been having to deal with too is what's been written on some of the headstones, because the modern technology, they can just laser print, do whatever they want, pictures, whatever. And I ended up rejecting something about a person who had passed away recently who had gang affiliation, and we rejected, and this is prior to the gang stuff, regalia information, but we just said we're not accepting that wording on a thing, and they didn't put it on in the end, which is good. But going forward with the new act in place about displaying gang patches and logos and stuff like that, we just won't be accepting that as well. So hopefully that clarifies where we're at with that process.
Awesome, Peter. Thanks. It sounds like you're right onto it with all of those things. So I look forward to when we can come to Makatū and talk more with some of those people about removing some of the encroachments.
Yep.
Thank you, Councillor A. Councillor Henry.
Hi, Peter. The natural burial site would need to be quite a considerable amount of area, I would imagine. And you're talking with Katikati, I wouldn't think that there was any capacity for that to be there, but we do.
That would be the new site, Councillor.
Pardon?
That would be the new site.
The new site. Oh, yeah. Okay. And where is the new site?
It's being worked on, but Peter might want to comment more on that.
Yeah. So the natural burial site.
We've got Noble's Farm gift that could be.
Right, that's something I'd talk with the regional council about. I'm not too sure what the conditions of the gifting of Ian Noble were was. But the natural burial site is out at Tupoki in the new cemetery in Dudley Verco Drive. And we've got an area, there's a plan laid out, and it caters for, you've got a stage 1, which is what we've got getting funded. And we can implement that build phase, I guess, to make the infrastructure in place to getting vehicles closer to the natural burial site, etc., and getting everything in place so we can have the natural burials once the bylaws passed and once we have the funding come through in the next couple of years.
Well, the funding was approved through the LTP, Peter, so that should be in place already.
Yep.
Councillor Joyce.
Another one I forgot was in Hamilton, they have a very nice garden for ashes. So it's natural burial, but of a different kind, much less expensive. So that was also raised as something to be looked at. But again, I know you've already covered the fact that ashes are treated differently, but is there any planning or provision for a ashes garden in any of our cemeteries? Because that's a popular feature over in Hamilton now and low cost.
Yep. So just to clarify, when you say garden, so out at Tupoki, we have rose beds, and around the edge of that there, you can put a plaque and stuff on that. And then we have a wall that you can put your ashes in. But one of the issues, once again, it gets back to that cultural sensitivity. If you were the gardener doing the gardening and having to dig amongst all that, is an appropriate thing to do.
So how it works in Hamilton, which is obviously address this issue, and I thought you guys were going to have a go and talk to them, is that they basically bury the ashes and plant a tree. So there is no gardening involved.
Okay, that's why I was clarifying a garden. My view of a garden
I
versus
understand that I don't
a
really
shrubbery.
I don't really see. It's not that I'm much of a gardener, but I wouldn't want to be weeding it amongst ashes either.
Exactly.
But I think we should look at what's happening in Hamilton. It does seem to be a popular feature, and it does meet again, the needs of people who want to get back to nature.
Yep.
If not the Baha'i faith.
Yeah. Thank you, Councillor Joyce, because that actually raises. So that's what we're saying is that we've got a natural burial site, but you're saying the same principle, but we're putting in a little urn with ashes in it, or direct ashes into it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not completely aware of how it works in Hamilton, but I think it's basically burying the ashes and planting a tree over it. So yeah, I fully accept the fact of gardening. It's probably not going to make the gardeners very happy with a plaque. Can we look into that as part of this, please?
Yeah, well, given what Peter said earlier about the legalities of ashes and so on, that sounds like an operational decision about how you do a cemetery rather than a bylaw issue as such. But happy to be corrected on that, Peter. But it sounds like more of an operational issue than or even RMP kind of issue rather than a bylaw issue. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. And one of the biggest trends we have at the moment is people, for affordability, not wanting to buy a new plot and putting ashes and urns into existing family burial plots. Yeah, so that's something that we do. We just got to record all that too. So we obviously have a record for genealogy about what's going on and who's where. And
I mean, that's also a cultural thing as well, because in North Asia, they have the family urn receptacle. So, there's various cultural issues around that as well.
Councillor Murray-Bench, then Councillor Thwaites.
I'm happy to move the recommendations together with any amendments.
Thank you for those. Councillor Thwaites.
I can clarify briefly on the Hamilton situation. They don't actually bury them and plant a tree. They've got pre-prepared paths like this table here and curves in the gardens now, and the plots are all available. And they actually buried the ashes in the path, and then there's landscaping around blocks. So there'd be a block of 100 or so with trees around it, and then another block of 100. And so that's how it's done there. So the plots are all ready now. You can go and visit now, and there's probably 5 years worth ahead already. The concrete paths are laid, and then the plaques are placed adjoining that. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Thwaites. So I've got the move and Councillor Murray-Bench. I'm happy to second that. So that's the 4 recommendations with the addition of the comment I made on natural burials. I can give you the wording for that later. That makes things easier for you. So is there any further debate on this one? No. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Moving on to, I think we'll try and finish the meeting and then have morning tea after that. So we'll move on to the draft livestock movements bylaw for consultation on page 181.
Kia ora. So yes, this paper relates to the draft livestock movements bylaw. Again, this paper was, oh, thanks, Ash. This bylaw was adopted in 2014. It is due for review after a 10-year period. The amendments made are largely editorial. The most significant amendment is removal of Schedule 1, which specifies the names of roads on which stock movements are not permitted and a consent is required from council. Instead, we've got a definition of urban roads, which we want to test with the community to make sure we've got the right fit here for our community and our users. And it's directly the issue being that we've obviously had significant development in the last 10 years. There will be further development in the next 10 years and additional roads will need to be added. So this definition will be used as a catch-all. Happy to take any questions.
Questions, anyone? Councillor Maybench.
We had considerable debate about this last time, and I'm sure Councillor Scrimgeour remembers it. It was really hotly debated by the wider community, but I think the safety of our roads and encouraging people to make their cows, look after them properly when they're crossing roads or developing the underpasses is something to continue to be encouraged. Is it not? Ashley, how are we going?
Hang on. Oh, there we are. Yeah, that's correct. We have with every application, there's some diagrams about how to cross the cattle and what temporary traffic management measures are required. With the cattle underpasses, the Road Controlling Authority, in which case this is Western Bay, contribute to funding at the underpasses as well. And that's on a sliding scale, depending on the volume of traffic on that particular road.
So do we have a problem with any farmers shifting their cattle now onto the roads? For example, the road to Rotorua, it was definitely a problem, but now it's all been subdivided and there's no longer anything on the road.
I haven't heard of too many safety concerns in the 7 years that I've been at council. The issues that we do tend to have just around cleanliness, typically, like farmers that aren't honouring the clean-up.
Question is, though, what do we do about those?
We would react to it through the service request. So it would be more reactive, through a complaint that we would receive. And we'd just look at it case by case.
A quick question for you. I was intrigued that in the definition of urban road, roads in residential, medium density residential, rural residential, and natural open space. I was just intrigued as to why that was included in urban roads.
We've used the same definition as in the district plan for consistency.
Okay. The other minor thing, which I think you're aware of, on page 187 and 188, there's an issue with the numbering there, but I think that's probably in hand. Right, Councillor Henry.
Yeah, 5.2 is about a consent required for, I guess it's regular stock crossing. Cattle, getting to the cow shed or whatever on a regular basis. This is just out of interest. Is there any contribution that's made within that consent for the deterioration of the road, which is quite significant when they're doing it on a regular basis?
The applicants, I understand the application has a fee associated with it, and that would be the sum. Possibly, yeah.
Councillor Sol. Sorry, have you finished? No. Yeah. Councillor Sol.
Thank you, sir. Basically, it's just a little bit over the other edge, is an extension of this. Largely, we're talking here about localism, local crossings, local, from one part of a farm across to another or whatever. But how does this affect situations, or have there been increases in requirement or not for people to actually move stock in other ways? And if there is, or even if there isn't, and something comes up, how do we cover things with the biocontrol, with the NATE things, etc.? Have we got some provision for stock movements and making sure we don't have stock traipsing past 15 farms with some disease and so on? That's all. Just how far does this actual bylaw go?
So the bylaw relates to the movement of stock. It does, a public health issue would be covered elsewhere. There are requirements in terms of those movements, and again, the removal of debris from the road to limit the risk of contamination, for want of a better word. But other than that, it would need to be addressed from a public health issue if it was raised and if there were concerns.
Councillor Deputy
Make a comment in response to
Councillor Sol. Can you guys
Sol's-
turn your mic off, Councillor Sol?
Oh, sorry.
Excuse me. I can't see how we could stop livestock owners from wanting to move stock along the road if they so desired, given that it's a national entitlement. However, the practicalities of such moving stock on roads with current traffic volumes, there are very few people willing to do that. And so it's a very small issue.
Thank you. Councillor Mowbridge.
Once again, sir, happy to move the recommendations within the amendments that have been brought forward.
Thank you, Councillor Mowbridge. Is there anyone wanting to second that? Councillor Henry. Is there any debate on this? No? Okay, so I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. And move on to the last item on page 224, which is the submissions on levy proposals for the Kautaumata Arawai and MB. Ariel.
Morena. These are two submissions that have been sent through, which cover the two levies that are proposed. These follow the regulation that is set out and proposed as part of our Local Waters Done Well program of change. The levies themselves will be included in the 2025-26 annual plan. And you had those numbers provided to you. So these have been submitted. I'm just happy to take any questions or any feedback.
Any comments on those? It's pretty straightforward, I think. So there's two recommendations there. I'm happy to move that. Councillor Grange is happy to second. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried.